Around about 20 years ago, I made my first visit to Jerusalem. I wasn't there as a pilgrim. I wasn't there as a tourist. I was there as part of a business visit that my boss, the chief executive of the energy company I was working for at that time, a visit that he was making to Israel and to the Palestinian territories to hopefully do some business for our company. And I was there as part of his group to work with the local media in Israel and to help them be able to interview him and meet with him and understand what it was that our company wanted to do out there in Israel. Well, I tagged a day's holiday onto the end of our visit, and I spent the day visiting some of the holy sites in Old Jerusalem. And on that day, I went to two very different places. Both lay claim to being the place where Jesus's body was laid in the tomb. One of them, slightly outside of the city, in a green garden area, is known as the Garden Tomb, and you get to it off a busy road by the bus station, and suddenly you're in a very green area. And the other site, which has more apparently historical evidence for it, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a large building that's been there for many hundreds of years and has been a sacred place for down through those years. And when you go to that church, it's usually absolutely packed and teeming with tourists and pilgrims wanting to look around that Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But strangely, on that day that I went, there were no queues. There were no queues for the holiest of areas. So I was able to go down some steps into one of the holiest parts where, particularly it's believed to be where the tomb of Jesus was. And I was down there, and I was on my own for several minutes. And it was while I was down there that I felt God saying to me, Peter, now is the time for you to leave this role you're currently playing, working for this company, and to come and, as it were, work for me. Well, that was around about 20 years ago. I left the company the following year, and since then I've been on this adventure of working in communications for the Church of England, firstly in St Albans, and then working in London, and then leaving that behind to train as a priest in the Church of England and to work in this ministry in a range of places. And here I am standing with you today on Easter Day here at St Paul's. But why do I tell you this story? Why do I tell you, if you like, this very personal story? Well, the answer is simple. It's this, that I want to emphasize that the tomb still has power today. The empty tomb still has power. And I want to look at this story in front of us this morning, this wonderful gospel account from John, in three very different ways. And each of them is very relevant to our lives today. And the first way is through the lens of history. The second way is through a very personal perspective. And the third way, if you like, is looking at this story with its amazing, universal, global importance and perspective. So first of all, the historical, through the lens of history. Now, the Apostle John, the author of this account, doesn't cast this story as, if you like, a sort of once upon a time myth, something that may have happened vaguely at some point in time. He's quite clear. He's really very sure that this was a real event that actually happened. And after all, he should know he was there. And the event happened in a specific place at the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea in Jerusalem on the first day of the week at the time of Passover in the year AD 33. It involved real people who we've met before in the gospel accounts. Mary, Peter, the disciple who Jesus loved, who is taken to be John himself. And we're told that it was Mary. Now, Mary probably with other women, which we can maybe deduce from the other gospel accounts. And it was she who first came across the empty tomb. Now, no myth maker, nobody making up this story would have had women find the empty tomb, because at that time they were regarded as unreliable witnesses and certainly not permitted to give evidence of their own accord in a court of law. And we're given specific details of who arrived at the tomb first. That John got there first. We're told this twice, which I think says as much about John's competitive spirit as it takes the story forward. And here's a story that, from my perspective, certainly could not have been made up. If it was true, if it was fabricated, if it was a story that the disciples had put together themselves, would they have been willing to be persecuted? Would they have been willing to be martyred? Would they have been willing to face all the trials that they faced simply for a story that they'd made up themselves? I say a resounding no. A historical perspective. So secondly, a personal perspective on this story. And at the centre of this beautiful account that we have from John is the grief of Mary Magdalene and her meeting with the risen Christ. Now, Yvonne's meditation this morning has helped us to enter into Mary's experience. Mary is naturally distraught. She's lived through the pain of the crucifixion, the grief, the separation, the disappointment. And now, on top of all this, it seems that somebody has come along and stolen Jesus's body. She is beside herself with sorrow and with grief. She's too overcome to make sense of the two angels who are sitting at either side of where Jesus' body would have laid. So Christ, executed between two thieves, now has two angels either side of where his body was. And Mary sees this man, who sees him through her tears, and she presumes he's somebody who's in charge of the garden, so he would know where Christ's body is, maybe. And so she asks him, and the risen Jesus speaks her name, Mary. Mary. And her world changes forever. The Good Shepherd knows his sheep. He knows each sheep by name. He calls them by name, and they recognize his voice. Mary recognized her Lord's voice. As Isaiah declared, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, and you are mine. You are precious to my eyes and honoured, and I love you." And as in our Isaiah passage this morning, here is the fulfilment of the promise. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. And these were the tears that Mary shed that were being wiped away this Easter morning. One writer looking at this passage described the encounter this way. Mary discovers a new relationship with Jesus. She must not try to possess him and cling to him or seek to be the only one loved by him. She must not hold on to the past, but live in the present moment, in a new relationship with the risen Jesus. How willing this Easter day are we to be looking to the future in our own lives, in the lives of those around us, in the life of this church as we look to the future of it? Are we holding on to some things from the past that we're being asked to let go of? So the resurrection story is historical. The resurrection story is personal, and it's also universal. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, the account that we've read ends with Mary being told to go and tell the disciples what she had seen, to be a witness to the resurrection. And this marks the beginning of the gospel message of resurrection going out into the world. The resurrection wasn't a story for a particular group of people in a small country, in a particular area, at a particular time more than 2,000 years ago. It's a message for the whole world and for all time. Now, this Easter is a very different one after more than a year of lockdown in one form or another. We can understand Mary wishing to touch Jesus, to touch or hold. We've lost the ability, haven't we, to touch or hold or hug or be with so many that we love over these past 12 months. And after this long time of separation that's been so very hard, and in my experience, I am only now just being able to hold my mother's hand, my mother who is in a nursing home not too far from here, who I was used to seeing most days. And although I can hold her hand, I have to wear gloves and an apron and a visor and a mask, because touch, we have discovered, is too dangerous just now. So after this pandemic year, we can understand why saying glibly, Happy Easter, is a hard thing for very many people to hear. Hard to hear when they've lost a loved one, hard to hear if they've been unwell or are unwell themselves, hard to hear if they've been made redundant or are unsure about their future. So in our Easter publicity this year as a church, we've been using the message, strength for today, hope for tomorrow. We've taken part of a traditional hymn and we've used it to convey the promise from Christ that he gives us strength. He gives us strength to rise up above the challenges that we face, and that he also brings hope for the future, a deep hope rooted in the truth of the resurrection, this wonderful Easter story. It's a message much needed in our COVID times. And if you watching this haven't put your hand in the hand of Jesus at this time, please do so. Please reach out to him in prayer. Reach out to him as you read the scriptures. Reach out to him and he will reach out to you. He's there offering you new life, the promise of a new start, a new beginning this Easter. And that promise is for you, whoever you are, and whatever your situation is this Easter day. And just as Mary was called to witness to the risen Christ, so we are told to speak of our faith in Christ and to tell others as we live out our faith in the truth of the resurrection. Peter, in the passage from the Acts of the Apostles, he says how God has commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that Jesus is the one ordained by God as judge of the living and judge of the dead. This is the wonderful message of Easter Day, that Jesus is alive, we can put our faith in him, and we can be part and receive his resurrection power. And as Christians, as followers of Christ, we are called to spread that message to a world that needs to hear it. Amen.